Time for Newsnight now on BBC Two with Emily Maitlis.
He knows that life is a competition and he always wants to be top. Whenever anyone asked him what he wanted to be, he would answer world king. That is true.
And the total number of votes given to each candidate was as follows.
The ball came loose from the back of a scrum, which it won't.
Jeremy Hunt, 46,656.
Of course, it'd be a great thing to have a crack at, but it's not going to happen.
Boris Johnson, 92,153.
I declare the motion overwhelmingly carried, and I close the House at 12:18 a.m.
And therefore I give notice that Boris Johnson is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Будет руководить Борис Джонсон.
Et donc je félicite Boris Johnson.
First of all, congratulations to Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson. Good man. He's tough and he's smart. They're saying Britain Trump.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
Tonight, the man who wanted to be world king gets a stab at leading our nation.
Okay, right. Thank you so much.
Hello, good evening. For 6 long weeks, Boris Johnson has been talking to the Conservative Party. Now he's got to talk to the country. Welcome to a brand new chapter in the history of Conservative Prime Ministers, a brand new chapter in the narrative of Brexit. This may have been the decade of gravity-defying political upsets, Trump, Brexit, even the 2017 election. But today marked the most scripted of endings for a contest that had never really been in doubt. Boris Johnson gained 66% of the vote of the Conservative membership and accepted the mantle of premiership as if it had all been a long time coming. What happens next is, frankly, anyone's guess. The day has seen more government resignations from those who don't want to stick around. But it's now time to decipher campaign rhetoric from government policy, threat from action, bonhomie from bluster. Time to see if there's an actual plan for our country's future. Tonight we'll hear from supporters, critics, government, opposition, and from those who grew up with him, work with him and know him well, including in Michael Cockrell's exclusive film for us. But first, here's Nick Ward.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
And lo, the ball finally came loose from the scrum. An overwhelming victory.
Boris Johnson, 92,153.
Time for magnanimity.
Conservative and Unionist Party.
Winning by 2-1, Boris Johnson becomes the first Tory leader elected with a double majority amongst the party membership and MPs. A sweet moment, though his Etonian rival David Cameron scored ever so slightly higher in the membership vote in 2005. With victory secured, time to reach out.
And today, at this pivotal moment in our history, we again have to reconcile two noble sets of instincts. Between the deep desire for friendship and free trade and mutual support in security and defence between Britain and our European partners, and the simultaneous desire, equally deep and heartfelt, for democratic self-government in this country.
Do I see a proud father before me?
Is this a dagger I see before me, the handle towards my grasp? Come, let me clutch thee, I have thee not. Well, of course you see a proud father. You see a tremendously proud father. How many fathers can walk into a room and say, actually, my son is about to be Prime Minister?
Sajid Javid, what do you think of that victory by Boris Johnson?
I think it's a resounding victory, and I think it's a great result, and very much looking forward to his premiership.
Can the party unite behind him?
Absolutely. I think you're already seeing that today. I think if you sort of take in the atmosphere in that room, there are people that were supporting Jeremy and Boris, and I think they're already starting to come together. It's what the party wants to see, but most importantly, it's what the country needs, and Boris is going to deliver that.
A very big win for Boris Johnson.
A very big win, yes. And the most important thing he said at the end was the campaign is over and the work begins. And he's absolutely right. And in that room, I think that there's been huge support for whoever was going to win, and now we need to get on and try and deliver it.
You were unhappy about Boris Johnson driving you home at the end of a party. How about him driving the country now?
Well, let's see. I think he knows he's got a very big challenge ahead, and he really sort of communicated some of that just now. We all know it's going to be a real challenge, but judging from the mood in that room, there's going to be total support for getting behind him and making it happen.
Boris getting such a large majority is crucial because it gives him a very clear mandate, and this, I think, will be powerful within the parliamentary party, that every Conservative MP will know that their members have voted for Boris Johnson.
We have a Brexiteer as Prime Minister. Do I see a happy Priti Patel?
Well, I think we've seen a phenomenal result today. This has been a hard-fought contest.
Priti Patel for Home Secretary?
Well, I'm not speculating about any of the changes that may come. That is obviously for Boris to decide.
Time for Andrea Leadsom to return to the cabinet table?
Well, that's always for the Prime Minister of the day to decide. It's the greatest honour to serve in government, and of course Brexit is something I'm passionate about, as is Boris, so it would be fantastic, but it's for the Prime Minister to decide.
So a predictable reaction to Boris Johnson's victory from ardent Remainers. The question is, do his critics in the Conservative Party have the heart to challenge him after his emphatic win? Boris Johnson's do-or-die pledge to leave the EU by the 31st of October, deal or no deal, prompted 3 more ministers to announce their resignations. Whether those ex-ministers succeed in resisting no deal will depend on how the incoming Prime Minister resolves deep Brexit divisions in his camp. On one side stand hardcore Brexiteers who want Boris Johnson to junk Theresa May's deal in its entirety and head straight to negotiations on Britain's future trading relationship with the EU.
The withdrawal agreement is as dead as Monty Python's dead parrot. Boris has said multiple times during the campaign it's dead. Cut to the chase and go for the free trade deal. No deal is still better than a bad deal, but a free trade deal is better than both. On the other side stand ministers in Boris Johnson's camp who acknowledge that core elements of Theresa May's deal are dead, but they say other parts are salvageable.
There are clearly elements of the deal that the former Prime Minister, negotiated which are good and which we're perfectly happy to accept. But it's also clear there are a number of things, very substantial issues like the backstop, which need to change if we're going to get this through Parliament.
A classic political split which will see some flexibility from Boris Johnson, his supportive ministers say. But one Brexiteer at the heart of his operation told me, we've got him trapped. He can't walk away now.
Boris, clear the way, please.
Joy after a long wait. But one departing cabinet minister sees trouble ahead, saying the only question now is which of his supporters will Boris Johnson betray?
Well, that was Nick Watt, and Nick's here. What will happen with these divisions then, Nick?
Yeah, pretty clear division, and it's interesting. I was talking to one supporter and they said it's very difficult to know which way Boris Johnson leans because he treats his operation a bit like a court. He likes the idea of competing interests. But it feels to me that Boris Johnson is leaning in an emollient direction. First appointment, Mark Spencer as his chief whip. Mark Spencer voted Remain, now strongly believes that leave needs to be delivered. Universally popular in the parliamentary party, that appointment. Although interestingly, I was talking to one of Boris Johnson's closest lieutenants who said to me, I think this reaching out may be going too far.
We've also heard a little bit more rumours of Home Secretary, other cabinet positions?
That's right. Well, I asked Priti Patel in that film, would she be made Home Secretary? A diplomatic answer. The Times is reporting that Priti Patel will indeed be appointed Home Secretary tomorrow. The other key job is Chancellor. I was told a few weeks ago that it would be a woman Chancellor, which would suggest Liz Truss, but I think Sajid Javid thinks that he's in with a strong chance, and that could all be mixed in with who will be Foreign Secretary. Will Jeremy Hunt keep his job?
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining us now, James Cleverly, the Brexit Minister and Boris Johnson supporter, and Ian Blackford, leader of the SNP at Westminster. Nice to see both of you. What's the plan, James?
Well, the plan is what the campaign was all about, what Boris has been saying for the last 6 weeks, which is to deliver Brexit, unite the country, and then defeat Jeremy Corbyn. And it's clear that he is focusing very much on doing those three things. In the speech that he gave to 1922, he recommitted to leaving on the 31st of October, but then very quickly went on to make a powerful case for investment in infrastructure, both transport infrastructure and digital infrastructure, education, policing numbers. So Brexit is really key, really important.
Did he move on quickly because he's got to somehow reconcile the Marc Francois version of it and the Robert Jenrick version of it, or, you know, Matt Hancock being told it was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of no deal, and Andrew Bridgen telling me this evening, bring it on, we want no deal.
Well, the person you need to listen to is the person who's been voted as the leader of the party and who tomorrow will become Prime Minister.
You're the Brexit Minister and you're here on his behalf, so which version is it?
The point that he has said, Boris has made it clear, that he is going to seek meaningful changes that can get through the House of Commons. He's particularly highlighted the fact that the backstop is deeply, deeply unpalatable and really won't fly. But ultimately, he's going to seek to get some kind of change.
So you've heard from Europe, and they've said that they're going to give you these meaningful changes. Is that right?
No, I haven't spoken to our counterparts in the EU, but it's worth remembering that the EU always start off by saying no until eventually they move their position.
Because you must know more than us, because all we've heard, you know, ridiculously from Michel Barnier, who literally 20 minutes after it was announced, was that he was working constructively to facilitate the ratification of the withdrawal agreement. And I think Nathalie Loiseau, the EU deputy, has said the EU's not for turning. So, but you've heard different. They are coming towards you now.
No, I just said I don't. My job.
He has heard differently. He's heard that the EU is now prepared to reopen and give him meaningful change. Is that what?
What he's asking for, what he's saying needs to happen in order to get this through the House of Commons is meaningful change.
But we know that because Theresa May spent 6 months asking for meaningful change. But he has had
the big difference now. The big difference now is that it is clear both within the Conservative Party and Parliament and in the EU that they know that if there isn't meaningful change, a Boris Johnson premiership will leave on the 31st of October, even if we don't have an agreement.
So you're 100% sure now that Europe is, despite all the tweets and all the stuff they've put out and the consistent refusals, that they will change now. They will change that.
I don't know for certain what will happen.
But you're full of positive energy and confidence now.
The bottom line is, ultimately, at the end of this process, we either leave with an agreement, we leave without an agreement. This is the reality that is going to confront people both in the UK and the EU. Everyone has said that they want to have an agreement and to get one through the House of Commons.
Well, everyone has said in this country, obviously, and in the EU, they've said we just want to ratify the withdrawal agreement that we agreed and that obviously our government signed off on. Let's imagine then that Europe do give you this this deal, this tweak deal, whatever it is. Boris Johnson still only has a wafer-thin majority, doesn't he? So, and Labour have now categorically ruled out working with him. John McDonnell said there would be no chance of that.
So, well, the Labour front bench may have said that, but what we can see in Parliament, there are massive splits in the Labour Party. A lot of very sensible, pragmatic Labour MPs recognise.
How many?
Well, I don't know for definite. No one can know until.
But enough, definitely, to get this.
You keep saying definitely. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I've had conversations with a number of Labour MPs who recognise that in order to meaningfully honour the referendum result, that they will need to work cross-party to get Brexit.
So you're not worried about the wafer-thin majority because you'll get the deal from Europe and you will get it through on the back of Labour MPs.
You keep ascribing absolutes to me that I'm not.
I'm just trying to work out the plan.
What I'm saying is that there are loads of MPs, loads of Labour MPs, who clearly got shouted at and sworn at when they were knocking on doors during the European elections, who now realise that if they are going to honour the 2016 referendum result, like they said they want to, they are going to have to get this deal across the line.
And I know that Brexiteers, like you, were worried that it would never properly be delivered by a Remainer. That was always the concern about Theresa May. Will you now say you own whatever happens to this Brexit? Any success, any failure is yours. It's the Brexiteers now. This is properly you in government owning Brexit.
Well, again, I never claimed that someone that voted Remain couldn't deliver Brexit. Indeed, I voted for the withdrawal agreement on a number of occasions.
Many in the more Eurosceptic wing of your party.
Yeah, well, that's not what I've said. It's never what I've said. So the point I'm making is that the government has got to deliver on the referendum result, which is to leave the European Union. But Boris has made it very, very clear there are a whole load of domestic policies, transport, education, policing, the getting that extra money to the NHS front line.
Yeah.
Those are also incredibly important, and those are the things that we want to focus on in government, as well as delivering Brexit.
And you've had Donald Trump this evening call him the British Trump. You must have been thrilled with that endorsement.
That's an interesting endorsement. And the bottom line is the United States of America are our closest allies in the world.
But is that how we should see
really
him now?
important.
That Boris Johnson is the British Trump.
Boris Johnson is the British Boris Johnson, and you know he's a unique politician.
Would you say that to Trump? Would you say, not sure we want a British Trump?
You keep ascribing things to me that I'm not saying.
No,
Boris
I'm
is
asking
Boris.
you.
Boris is Boris. Boris is a fantastic communicator, a wonderful natural communicator. I've seen him enthuse a room like no other politician that I've worked with. I've seen him build a team. I've seen him deliver in government in London. I've seen him win elections against expectations. And these are the attributes that we now need as the leader of our party and as Prime Minister.
It all sounds okay, actually, doesn't it, Ian, when you sort of spell it out like that? We're going to get the deal, it's going to be ratified, it's going to get through Parliament. Sigh of relief?
If only thus. And I'm afraid to say I don't see it happening that way at all. The reality is Europe is not going to open up the withdrawal agreement. That's been said consistently. Yes, they're prepared to negotiate around the political declaration, but if that's the case, then the backstop remains in place. And what I worry about, Emily, is that the default position is that we do leave the European Union on a no-deal basis at the end of October. And I would simply say that Boris Johnson doesn't have a mandate for that. I don't believe that Parliament will support that. You know, the situation is that last week, before Boris becoming Prime Minister, we had a vote in Parliament to stop Boris Johnson closing Parliament down. There was a majority of 41. A number of Conservative MPs voted for that or abstained. That is a proxy for Parliament saying it doesn't want no deal.
Right. So what are you doing then to stop it? Who are you talking to in whatever this coalition is?
Well, we've been talking across the House. And what we need to do is recognise that we need to change legislation if we want to stop that. We are
when you say
prepared to
across
do
the
that.
House, we know there are some Conservatives. Who do you think you've got? 10, 20?
No, I think if you look last week, there were 17 Conservatives that voted for the motion. There was a considerable number that also abstained, those in government that are now free. They're leaving office. You've seen that happen
Do you
over
think
the
you've
course
got
of...
40?
I don't know. I think the scale of the majority last week was actually bigger than I thought. But the responsibility that we have now got is to find a mechanism that allows us to bring forward a bill that will strike out no deal as a default option.
So you've come a long
to do
way if actually you just want to strike out no deal, because, you know, a lot of people would look at the Scottish National Party and say, Boris Johnson, this is what you dream of, isn't it? I mean, he could be the last...
I think there's two things. We will, of course, work across party to stop no deal because it would be calamitous for all of us. Boris Johnson last week was asked what impact no deal would have and he couldn't answer the question. We know from the Office of Budget Responsibility that it could tip the UK into recession. We would simply say to the people of Scotland, Boris Johnson doesn't have a mandate in Scotland, but the SNP does have a mandate for a referendum. We won the election in 2016 on that basis.
So do you think Boris Johnson will be the last UK Prime Minister?
I think many people have said that. I think that's absolutely right, because at the end of the day, if Boris Johnson wants to drive us out of the European Union, that is going to threaten jobs in Scotland. And people.
You think he's going to be the last UK Prime Minister?
I do that because I think what is emerging, that people in Scotland are seeing that the opportunity for Scotland as an independent nation. You know, there's been a lot of talk today about police numbers, but police numbers throughout the UK have fallen by 20,000 over the course of the last few years. In Scotland, they've increased by close to 1,000. I think that separation of a government in Scotland that's been getting on with the day job, contrasting that with what's happened in Westminster.
To be honest, people could pick a lot of holes in what the SNP government's doing in Scotland now.
But the point is, we won the European election in Scotland, 38%. We've been in power for 12 years. There's a real difference in what we see as the chaos.
Let me ask you about coalition building, though, because Joe Swinson made very clear this morning that the Lib Dems would deal with Labour but would not deal with Jeremy Corbyn. Where are you on this? Will you take Labour wholesale? Will you take Jeremy Corbyn and work with him if the chance comes?
What we will do is we will put ourselves in front of the people of Scotland if there's an election and seek to win as many seats as possible.
Of course.
I'm confident would increase that. And we would form part of a progressive alliance. But
With Labour,
fundamentally,
with Jeremy
well,
Corbyn's
look,
Labour.
what we said we would do is we would look at things on the basis of contents and supply motion. We said that in 2015 and 2017. We haven't written our manifesto for the next election. We will publish that as an elections call. But fundamentally, the choice the people of Scotland will face is whether they wish to become an independent country or not, save ourselves from the chaos of Brexit.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. Labour were quick to attack Boris Johnson today, with Jeremy Corbyn saying he hasn't won the support of the country and calling for a general election. They've also said they won't work with him on Brexit. Earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, on a noisy College Green. I began by asking him whether now was the time for Labour to call a vote of no confidence.
We'll call it when we can win it. I think it'll take a while for the Conservative Party to settle down, for sides to be determined, particularly those ex-ministers going onto the backbenches. So we'll see in September.
You might be leaving it too late, right? Because if you call it, let's say, the 3rd of September, the whole process, including the time you need to run an election, will be the 24th of October. That's a week away from
Tight.
our...
All of this is tight, but the call has to be made when we can win it. No use calling a no confidence if we can't win it. And I don't think we'll be able to win it until a number of Tory MPs have seen exactly what Boris is up to on the no deal.
Isn't it incredible, though, that we're in this position at all? I mean, the government barely has a majority. The Conservatives are barely functioning for 3 years. They haven't sorted out any domestic policy. I don't need to tell you that. They haven't sorted out the one thing that they promised to do when in power. You were handed this dream scenario, almost impossible to screw it up, and yet you're neck and neck. What's gone wrong?
We've defeated them time and time again in the House. We've defeated them on proposal after proposal. Whenever we thought it was in the interest of the nation to do so, we've defeated the Tories. We've forced a Prime Minister out of office. They've now brought forward another Prime Minister.
That wasn't you. That was her own party.
It was Parliament, which the basis of that was the Labour Party and Tory rebels. She was forced out of office because we continuously defeated her. And we defeated her on a scale not seen before in Parliament.
Oh, come on. That's delusions of grandeur. If you think it was your power that got her out, you've got the same problems.
Where did those votes come from?
Isn't the truth that you've got...
Where did those votes come from? They came from Labour MPs.
She never thought that she would have Labour's votes. She thought she'd have her own side's votes.
It was Labour MPs mobilising votes across the House of Commons, and we defeated her.
Isn't the truth, though, that you've actually got exactly the same problem as the Tories, that the membership want a leader that the electorate probably don't? It's the same for Jeremy Corbyn as it is for Boris Johnson, as it was for Theresa May.
We're ahead in the polls. We're ahead in the polls at the moment.
Hardly.
And
it's a four-way split, as
we're
you
ahead,
well know.
We're ahead in the polls in the most difficult circumstances with this Brexit issue carrying over us. We're ahead in the polls.
This government has been here for nearly a decade. You haven't won a nationwide election since 2005.
Okay. 2017. The polls were, we were 24 points behind. The prediction that we would be wiped out. We've almost won. Given another week, we can come.
You haven't won a nationwide election since 2005.
We performed better than any commentator or anyone else predicted. We were nearly there. What we're saying now is that if the Tories are so confident, bring on that election now, and we'll show you what we can do.
You know that double the number of members no longer support Jeremy Corbyn, as did this time last year.
He's won 2 elections for leadership with resounding numbers.
For leadership?
Yes, that's right.
And where does it get you? Look where you came in the European elections. Look what happened in the locals.
It got us within an inch of power in 2017 when everyone else wrote us off.
Tony Blair couldn't say to me last night that he would vote Labour at the next election. Does he represent those you need to win back? What would you say to him?
I'd say vote Labour, because what you need to do is get rid of this Tory government.
And he has said it's not about the Brexit policy in this case, it's because anti-Semitism is a real problem for him, fundamentally repugnant to everything the Labour Party should stand for. You wouldn't disagree with him
No, of course
there.
I wouldn't, and we're dealing with it. We're dealing with it.
You know, though, that you say bring it on in terms of a general election. Your house isn't in order, that the weakness of the Labour Party is what has enabled the right wing now. That lack of clarity, that weakness is what has landed us here now.
We've abided by the democratic decisions of our members at the last Labour Party conference, which was to block a no-deal Brexit, which we did in Parliament once, and as often as we possibly could. seek to get a deal that would work and protect jobs in the economy. We're in 6 weeks of negotiations with the Tories. It failed because the Tories couldn't deliver.
Can you still work with the Tories now?
No, I don't think we can. They cannot deliver. And now under Boris Johnson, all they're interested in is really forcing through a no-deal Brexit, or a Brexit will not secure the jobs and the economy.
Jo Swinson has made it clear that she'd be happy to work with the Labour Party, but not with Jeremy Corbyn himself. Does that give you pause for thought now about the style of government
Isn't it interesting? Jo Swinson was willing to work with the Tories, introduce some of the most savage austerity cuts that cost people their lives.
But as you said, you're all on the same side now.
But she won't work with a Labour leader who opposed all those austerity measures. I think Jo Swinson needs to look inside her own conscience about her own behaviour under the austerity programme she supported in government.
So how are you going to get your people's vote then? You can't work with the Tories and you can't work with the
what we'll do is
Lib
we'll put
Dems.
proposals forward in Parliament. We're not entering into any coalitions or anything like that, but we will work with others to secure that vote. And we expect Jo Swinson, when we put forward our proposals on no confidence or for a people's referendum, to support them.
That was John McDonnell. He dreamed as a child, don't forget, of being world king, which suggests that today may just mark the first baby steps for one Boris Johnson, who tomorrow will become Britain's 77th Prime Minister. He's already had 2 terms as London Mayor, a spell as Foreign Secretary, a lucrative job as a columnist, and is author of several books. His family is instantly recognisable. His language is unique. But who really knows the man that will lead this country through the next daunting steps ahead? Michael Cockrell has been to find out, and a warning that this film contains flashing images.
Would you like to be Prime Minister? I think it's a very tough job being Prime Minister. Very tough job. I mean, obviously, if the ball came loose from the back of a scrum, which it won't, it might, or of course it would be a great thing to have a crack at, but it's not going to happen.
The human bulldozer who snatched the ball from the back of the Tory scrum is a man of many contradictions. A classical scholar turned popular entertainer, a self-proclaimed liberal one-nation Tory, hand in glove with the hardline Brexiteers.
There's a spectrum of opinion about him. One is that he will be the most unsafe pair of hands ever to open a prime ministerial red box. And at the other end, people think here is a man of brilliance and flair who can suddenly, like an alchemist, turn the base metal of Brexit to something shiny and remarkable.
So who is the real Boris Johnson? What makes him tick? And what kind of fist will he make of the job he has craved since he was a boy? This is Boris Johnson, age 5, paddling his own canoe. He grew up the eldest of 4 children in the hugely competitive Johnson family.
He knows that life is a competition and he always wants to be top. Whenever anyone asked him what he wanted to be, he would answer world king. That is true.
He painted this self-portrait at the age of 12 and downgraded his ambition to becoming British Prime Minister. He was off to Eton, where he became a star of the school plays and discovered he could make people laugh.
Do you think that you learnt something for later life from acting in plays at Eton, that you could actually get more laughs by looking as if you don't know your lines than actually remembering them?
Well, I certainly think that as a general tactic in life, if that's what you're driving at, it is often useful to give the slight impression that you are deliberately pretending not to know what is going on, because the reality may be that you don't know what is going on, but people won't be able to tell the difference.
This is why he's dementing for other politicians, because they're all, to an extent, playing a part assigned to them by the party. You know, you have to be loyal, you have to be a good Tory. Boris has realised quite early on that he would go further if he broke all those rules, and people would love him even more.
At Oxford, he managed to be elected President of the Union, the training ground for future Prime Ministers, by disguising his true Tory colours.
I declare the motion overwhelmingly carried, and I close the House at 12:18 a.m.
The Tory MP, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, is a passionate Brexiteer and a long-time fan of Boris Johnson.
Gosh, well, I first met him in Oxford 30-odd years ago when I was a new student at the Oxford Union. What I remember most was this extraordinary articulacy, his ability to tell a story, to capture the essence of something. It was mesmerising. For a young woman of 18, I'd never come across anything like it.
After Oxford, Johnson became a trainee journalist at The Times, where he was sacked for making up a quote. But he got a job at the Daily Telegraph.
That's my impression. But that's 18 months away and anything can
He
happen.
became its Brussels correspondent and immediately set about ridiculing the European Commission. From Euro manure to one-size-fits-all condoms, little escaped Johnson's eye. Though his fellow Brussels reporters felt his stories were hyped up beyond recognition, it made Boris Johnson's name.
Yeah, I like it.
Johnson came back from Brussels as a star and was much in demand on celebrity TV. He was made editor of The Spectator and was elected Tory MP for Henley, which intensified his ambition to make it to number 10. But the twice-married Johnson was sacked from the front bench for lying to the party leader about an adulterous affair with one of his staff. It was one of a string of love affairs that have raised what's called the character question about his fitness for the job of Prime Minister.
He is a man with human frailties, as many are, and I would always say, should our politicians all be, perfect, puritanical, immaculate lives led, perhaps, then we wouldn't be representing the society that we live in.
He has got great qualities, of that there is no doubt. They're just not the qualities that I want to see personally as Prime Minister of this country. These are not the times when we need someone who is a bit of a chancer. Boris is a chancer. He is a chancer.
Bonjour, c'est moi, Boris Johnson, le maire de Londres.
Здравствуйте, друзья. Меня зовут Boris. Have a very, very happy Chinese New Year, everybody. Kung hei fat choi.
A decade ago, Johnson showed he could reach parts that other Tories couldn't when he was elected mayor of normally Labour London. And as the front man for the London Olympics, he famously got stuck on a zip wire.
It's going well, it's very, very well organised. Get me a ladder.
If any other politician anywhere in the world got stuck on a zip wire, it would be, disastrous. For Boris, it'll be an absolute triumph. There's no he defies all forms of gravity.
When David Cameron called the Brexit referendum, he desperately wanted Boris Johnson on his side in the campaign. But Johnson was now calculating whether to reverse the stance he'd taken 3 years earlier.
So how would you vote tomorrow if there was a referendum?
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want to be part. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
I rang Boris and said, Boris, you can't do this. You cannot come out for leave. You can't. And I said, if you don't, Boris, I'll run your campaign to be leader. I have to say, I did say that to try and bribe him into not doing it. Immediately went the other way, naturally.
Right, well done, everybody. Thanks a lot. Take care. Brilliant.
Many people thought that Johnson chose to back leave to endear himself to pro-Brexit Tory members in a future leadership contest. That was the view of the senior Remain Minister Amber Rudd as she faced Johnson in the TV referendum debate.
You need to look at the numbers, although I fear the only number that Boris is interested in is the one that says number 10. But the fact is, he's the life and soul of the party, but he's not the man you want driving you home at the end of the evening.
As he left home the morning after the Leave campaign's shock victory, Johnson had become simultaneously the most hated and the most loved politician in the country. With politics plunged into convulsive and unpredictable turmoil, the new Prime Minister, Theresa May, gave Boris Johnson one of the great offices of state as Foreign Secretary, much to his astonishment. At the Foreign Office, he met the senior mandarins. and after his first full day at his new school, he emerged to face the media.
Foreign Secretary Johnson, diplomacy is about personal relationships. Today, the French Foreign Secretary has said you've told a lot of lies in the campaign. The German Foreign Secretary has said some of the stuff you've done is outrageous and irresponsible.
Well, after a vote like the referendum result on June the 23rd, it is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting, and clearly they're making their views known in a frank and free way. I have to say that the gentleman that you mentioned, the French foreign minister, in fact, has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago.
Can we move on? Forgive me, I'm going to...
His most contentious moment as Foreign Secretary came when he gave evidence to MPs about the fate of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. The Anglo-Iranian woman had been jailed by the Tehran regime for being an alleged spy.
When you look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it.
In fact, she'd gone to Iran on holiday, and Johnson had misremembered his briefing, and the Iranians used his words against Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
I think he had a chance to prove to the world and to himself, to his friends and supporters, that he would be he could do a really big job at a very difficult time, which it was, and in my view, he failed. So that, again, also gives me cause for anxiety and worry. It doesn't alter the fact that he's extremely agreeable to have dinner with.
Sir Nicholas Soames is the grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, and Boris Johnson recently wrote a biography of Churchill, in which he pointedly noted that Churchill was a journalist turned politician with many human flaws, who was written off, but called in to save his country in its darkest hour. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson is now about to become Britain's 55th Prime Minister and the 20th Old Etonian, with many people questioning his ability to handle the most daunting and difficult of jobs in the most forbidding political environment since the Second World War. Do you have any doubts about your ability to fulfil the role of Prime Minister?
I think people who don't have doubts or anxieties about their ability to do things probably have something slightly terrifyingly awry. We all have worries and insecurities, but I think we've done a pretty good job so far in City Hall, and that's what I want to continue to do.
Boris has a vision for the country, and this energy and this optimism which the British people are longing to feel, because he believes in the future. He is an optimist, and an optimist, it's catching. It's like a smile, it's catching. You share it like a cold. You look at it and you smile too. He's not fazed by difficult. In fact, I think the harder the challenge, the more we'll get out of him as Prime Minister Boris.
My biggest single worry, perhaps, about Boris Johnson is that he seems to me to be a politician who has inhaled his own legend before he's created it. He's shown levels of personal and political narcissism which do worry me. And it's as if he believes in his own myth. My own feeling veers towards the anxiety end of the spectrum. I hope I'm wrong, but it certainly does veer towards the anxiety end of the spectrum, because you cannot busk being Prime Minister.
I texted him last weekend, and I said to him, when Churchill became Prime Minister, on the day he became Prime Minister, he went back to his flat where he met my grandmother and his children, and they drank a bottle of champagne. And he proposed a toast, which I quoted to Boris, of "Here's to not buggering it up." And I said to Boris, I can't possibly vote for you. I can't vote for you. But I pray for all our sakes, you don't bugger it up. And that is my hope for Boris.
And your fear?
My fear is that he could bugger it up.
That film by Michael Cockrell. Well, to chew over what a Boris Johnson premiership might look like, we're joined by Camilla Cavendish, the former Director of Policy for David Cameron, Patrick O'Flynn, now the Social Democrat Party, Sina Shah, the President of the Young Conservative Women, and Jonathan Friedland from The Guardian. First, I'm going to take you through tomorrow's front pages. One story, but very different images. If I take you sort of around the panorama. The Independent then has got this picture of, I guess, a Churchillian Johnson. Just 100 days to avert no deal disaster, a border conundrum that can't be solved. The new Prime Minister. Welcome to Brexit's darkest hour is their headline. The Daily Mail has got now bring us sunshine. A burst of optimism on the day Britain baked. Brexit-weary nations cry. And the Daily Mirror has got the various stunts of Boris Johnson. It's really not funny anymore. The Telegraph, I'm the dude, with Boris Johnson on the door of, on the door. And the Times, as Johnson goes to work, the can-do spirit for Britain as he becomes the PM today. Priti Patel says has been offered the top role, but Hunt's future is in doubt. That's Home Secretary and Foreign Secretary. And The Guardian has an ambition is fulfilled. What next for Britain? And on that note, Patrick, I'm going to start with you. Do you think this is a good day for Brexit? For those who love and want Brexit, is it now more likely to be delivered well?
Yes, in fact, I think the whole year has been brilliant for Brexit. The 2 years preceding to that was like a tug of war when my team was losing ground every single month. And I think the European elections were supposed to be the moment where the Remain parties clearly won, the Lib Dems won, but Farage pops up with the Brexit party and puts a spanner in the works, and the next domino is the fall of Theresa May. And now you have the guy who led Vote Leave as Prime Minister, having during the campaign specifically said, we're definitely out on October the 31st. So it's been very good calendar year for Brexit so far. Not that we trust him altogether, but we're in much better shape than we were at the beginning of the year.
Camilla, is this the day then that Remainers have to move on, just sort of pipe down and say it's done?
I think Remain is over, and I think they don't have to pipe down because, can still fight the battle, as it were, but I actually think something fundamental has shifted in the Tory party and in the country. So people are very weary of Brexit, as one of the headlines said. There's a sense in the Conservative Party that we've just got to put this behind us and move on and get on to the kind of domestic agenda which they all believe Boris Johnson will push forward, all the kind of some of the socially liberal things, a lot of public spending that they would like to see. And there's a kind of wishful thinking about this. Can we just get this over with? And so the dividing line now is between no deal and some form of tweaked deal. It is no longer, I think, really realistically between Leave and Remain.
And that deal is going to be tweaked, you think? I mean, it will come towards us.
I think it probably is. We can argue about exactly how. I do think there is a genuine appetite in Boris's camp to push for no deal on the basis that you must have brinkmanship, and the question is who will blink first. I think you actually do probably have a chance of getting a version of Theresa May's deal through Parliament because you have enough people who, as I said, have sort of seen where the political gravity is shifting.
There is an irony, isn't there, that Labour's finally got to the place where it can spit out what it's sort of thinking about a second referendum, and most people think it's now too late.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I know that Patrick's celebrating what he thinks is a good year. I think this is quite a dark day. I'm with Patrick, I'm with Peter Hennessy on the anxious end of the spectrum. I think it is a dark day when a documented liar and certified charlatan is Prime Minister of the country, someone whose own colleagues said for a long time was unfit to be Prime Minister. We can't let that pass without note. That's a significant moment for British democracy, I think. On Remain itself, I understand Camilla's point. I think right now that's true, that the focus of the argument is no deal versus something. As if to say, if we avert no deal, everyone breathes a sigh of relief and says, thank God that's over. I don't think it will quite work like that, because I think if we do screech and somehow avoid going off that cliff, that will be because we've averted that, and suddenly the impossibilities of Brexit, which have not gone away, will be revealed in some other way. Either you can't get no deal because Parliament blocked it, you can't get a tweaked deal because Europe won't move, and there are contradictions just contained within the Brexit idea. There always were, because basically it's bad for our economy, and yet people have voted for it. And that paradox, that tension, doesn't go away just because Boris Johnson's in number 10.
Sina, all the voices in that film seem to come to the same place. He's great fun to have dinner with, but you can't busk being PM. Doesn't that worry you? You're a big Boris Johnson supporter.
I am, yeah. I was a member of his campaign team. I think what Boris offers is a personality that can get a lot of the Brexit debacle sorted, in the sense that people really buy into what he says in the general public. And he's just a born leader. And I don't think that's not something that you necessarily learn. He has just got that gift. And I think he's got the kind of personality where he can get people to rally around him. And what we've seen is the membership have done this. Our parliamentarians have overwhelmingly supported Boris as well. So
that is obviously it's a tiny percentage of the electorate though, isn't it?
Of course, but I mean, at the moment, what we've got to work with is, are the members going to support our leader? Are our parliamentarians going to get behind our leader? And I think that's very much the message that we've sent.
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? It's about, does a character actually have the potential to change the whole maths of Brexit?
Well, I do think we're probably underestimating the extent to which people will feel so refreshed, so relieved that they have a storyteller and a communicator in Number 10 after sort of 3 years of somebody who really, really didn't like talking to people and couldn't do it. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the effect of that. I also think that, parliamentarians on the Tory side, the ones who've just gone to the back benches, who have deep principles and believe very much in trying to hold firm, will find it very, very difficult to withstand the pressure from their own party not to let Jeremy Corbyn in. And that will become a huge issue for most of those people.
What do you think then? They won't vote against their
I think it will be very hard to pass a vote of no confidence.
I agree with that, because I think that the ability of this guy to change the political weather is underestimated, and it was commentary at conventional wisdom for the last year that Boris wouldn't make the final two because 2/3 of Tory MPs hated him and they would stop him getting to the membership, who would therefore vote for him.
It wasn't just commentary at the Patrick. I mean, think of where we were a year ago. You know, he'd resigned from his job. He wasn't considered a very good foreign secretary. It was his own party saying...
Tory MPs themselves used to say he is unfit for office.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just positioning. They said he was unfit for the job and they moved.
Look what's happened and why have they moved? Because the current of public opinion.
And you were right to mention the European elections and how well the Brexit party did. That did change it. But this point about his skills and communication, it's true, but where will they be deployed? They're not going to work on the Europeans. That's the one group who are immune to his charm.
Well, I don't think the Irish are immune. They're in an economy that's only a 20th of the size
much
of the
more
United
likely,
Kingdom.
Much more likely is he uses those skills to turn around to the very people who voted down Theresa May's deal, the ERG and others, other hardliners, Brexiters, and he says to them, because it's coming from me, Boris Johnson, an arch leaver, take the same deal you rejected a matter of months ago. The lipstick on a pig's back.
Which may work.
Does that work then?
It may possibly work. I mean, what we did see were some of those really hardline Brexiteers voting for the withdrawal agreement at the last hour. But
so they've done it already, in a sense.
I don't think it will work, because I think Nigel Farage and this pop-up party is such a remarkable achievement that it also has changed the game. And I think he's going to have a Brexit that looks like Brexit to most Brexit voters to get away with it.
Are they still trying to bring him down? I mean, does Farage have a plan that goes beyond Boris Johnson in charge and Brexit on the 31st?
I haven't spoken to Nigel for a while, but I
love this caveat, but we know you know what's going on.
But I think that if there's a Brexit that looks like Brexit, that Nigel won't particularly hang around with this thing called the Brexit Party. I think he'll think his place in history is secured, and I think it will be, as the guy who forced the referendum and then the guy who saved the project earlier in the year.
So a tweak to a withdrawal or something, you rename the backstop, the border
you polish
process.
Up Malthouse compromise, and you maybe get a few tweaks
and he gets it through.
I mean, and the great attraction, of course, to the sort of mainstream of the Conservative Party would be that if you can get through that point, you effectively neutralise Nigel Farage. I mean, you also potentially neutralise quite a lot of the Lib Dems, because at the moment the threat is, of course, that remain for those people. The threat is partly those two wings, and that is why we will have an election, in my view, probably before the end of the year, but certainly early in the next year.
I wonder if you think there's been a snobbery, that there's been this assumption from the Remain side that the Brexiteers are incapable. They don't really know what they're doing. They can't be bothered with detail. They can't get it through, and actually.
Well, they've certainly allowed us to make that case, haven't they? Because there's Boris Johnson who doesn't know the difference in 5B and 5C and holds up a kipper and says these are European rules and actually they're British rules. So they've allowed that case to be made. But rather, I think the problem is not in the Brexiters, it's in Brexit. That there is a fundamental set of impossibilities and contradictions there that keep coming out with people saying, if only you believed more. The problem is in the idea itself. Now we'll have a believer who, like Tinkerbell, will say, as long as we have faith, and it still won't work.
Why
Because
don't you
Brexit
see
can't
that?
work.
Well, look, 12% of the economy is trade into the rest of the EU, right? And undoubtedly, a bit of friction there is not going to be welcome, particularly to the corporate sector. But people believe in the nation state. In the 20th century, millions of people died for the nation state, and now you're trying to make the case that we can't leave the European Union because there might be a shortage of Mars bars, right? You are getting the principle. No, the motivation of the Brexit vote is about the leeching of too much sovereignty and too much power, and I think people think that's more important than
I want to end just very briefly. We're going
tariffs.
to wrap up. We heard Trump say that Boris is the British Trump now. What does this tell us about populism now? Does it make you feel, is he part of populism? Is this populism on the rise? Is it?
I think that what people really want is somebody who's a human being. And I think for a really long time, we're seeing these manufactured politicians that nobody can relate to. And actually, they can't relate to the mass public. And I think what we need is something different. And that's why we voted in Boris.
I think what it shows is people want a celebrity who can look like he's an ordinary human being, but it's styled to look like that.
Thank you all very much indeed. That's all we have time for this evening. But we'll be live from Westminster tomorrow. Do join us then. Good night from all of us here. Bye-bye.